Good morning. I'm Reverend Lucie Carter-Lopez, and I'm going to be giving the message today. I just wanted to start off by thanking Natalie Nig, our technical whiz, who puts this service online for us. It takes a lot of work, and so if you have the opportunity to thank her, please do so. I also want to thank Carol Ann and Claudia and for their work behind the scenes in choosing some of the music that is very helpful to us. And finally, I want to thank Noah, Christy, and CJ Lopez. Noah and I have written another song, and CJ will be singing it for us, or she has just sung it for us, so that was really cool. Thank you very much for that. Today I'm going to be talking about two things. One is that they're inherently connected, and it's standing up for yourself and standing up for what's right. And sometimes they're both the same thing. I recently came across an article called 5 Reasons to Stand Up for Yourself by Brett Blumenthal, and I'll be using these concepts through the talk today. Let's look at both of these concepts and see why they are important. Number one, it builds self-confidence. And although it may be difficult for us at first, the more we stand up for ourselves and our beliefs, the more we build our own self-confidence. One of the first things that happened to me when I was 9 years old, I started parochial schools. And I had nuns for teachers. And instead of having a 20 class and my regular teacher that I'd had previously, all the kids that I had known since kindergarten, I was in a class that had 50 people and a nun for a teacher. And they dressed all in black at that time, and they had the big white wimple around their head and the big veil over the top of that. And frankly, they were scary. I was a little intimidated, and I was a lot intimidated by them. And during the course of the first few months in school, during our religious training, Sister mentioned that people who weren't baptized Catholic would not be able to go to heaven. And I was rather startled and alarmed because my mother's side of the family, her parents had each a different religion, and each of her siblings had a different religion as well, and they all practiced together. And my grandmother used to say that by the time we said the prayer at a family meal, the food was cold. So you can imagine how alarmed I would be with this. I also had a little friend that I had made in the neighborhood that we had moved into, and she was not practicing any religion at all, so that concerned me. And I used my thinking, and when she came to spend the night one night, my mother sent us off to take a bath. And during that whole process, I explained to her that if she wasn't baptized, she wasn't going to go to heaven, and that I know how to baptize her, so I could do that. Did she want me to? And she did. And so I baptized her. And Sister had done it in a way that where she had explained every minute detail of the baptism, because if you don't do it correctly, it doesn't even count, is what my understanding was at the time. And she told us that if ever we were witness to an accident where somebody might be dying and they had not been baptized, or we didn't know if they had been, it was our duty to baptize them so that they could go to heaven. So I baptized my little friend. And that was the first kind of decision that I made on my own that seemed right to me and right with my principles. The next thing is with it is it helps you to develop a strong sense of self. If we bow to others and their opinions and do things their way, whether right or not, we start to lose the sense of our own identity, and we start to forget where we truly stand. For me, being the oldest child was a big part of my identity because it was my duty to watch my younger siblings from the time I was small when we were out in the yard playing. And it was also part of my duty, even as they got older, to make sure that everything was okay with them and they weren't doing something that was going to get them hurt. And so I was always a kind of like a monitor for that whole process, keeping an eye out. And I came to understand that it was my job to stand up and to be there for people who were younger and didn't have the understanding of what was going on, and also to stand up for people who had no agency whatsoever. So I became very clear that that was part of my job as a person and as a human being. And I accepted that. Number 3, it develops self-respect. The more you stand up for yourself and for your beliefs, the more respect that you will have. If you continually give to what others want and compromise your own values and in the process, you're going to lose your respect for yourself. And I think that's true. And one of the things that ended up really bringing this to the forefront for me was 1965. I was a sophomore in high school, and the Watts riots had started. And my father had watched the news, and he came into the dinner table, and he was highly upset, and he was really angry, and he started shouting about everybody. There was nobody that he liked anymore. He didn't like the Polish people. He didn't like half the German people, of which he was supposed to be one. He didn't like people of color. He didn't like any of this stuff, and I was absolutely stunned. I remember just pushing my chair back suddenly and standing bolt upright. And I said to him, "That is not what you taught us. That is not how we learn to behave." I said, "Do you remember that my best friend is a Native American? Do you remember that my younger sister's best friend is a Mexican American? And do you remember that my other sister's best friend is an African American? I can't believe you're saying this. I'm ashamed of you." And I just stomped out of the room. And I didn't even consider the fact that he might get angry, because my father was truly awesomely scary when he was angry. But apparently my standing up to him was such a shocking thing that he actually was ashamed of what he had said. And he never came into the room, and I was just in there just seething and angry about everything that he had said. The 4th principle is that it builds integrity. Doing the right thing and standing up for your beliefs may not be easy, and believe me, it's not. It's not easy. I have often been shaking in my boots as I'm standing up for something that I think is really crucial and important. But when you do, you know that you're able to look yourself in the mirror and know that you did the right thing, that you feel good about yourself, and you'll know that you had integrity. And the only thing I can remember that really speaks to this is the song, "The Man in the Mirror." The Man in the Mirror was something that I really came to understand, and I was always very, very happy to listen to that song because it reminded me of who I am, that when I do something, that when I take a stand, it has to be within my belief system, it has to be in integrity, and it has to be either for me or for somebody else who's not capable of standing up for themselves. So I think that's important. I had another incident with my father in my junior year of high school. My grandmother had always been a heavy woman. She had a heart problem, and every couple of years or so she would have a heart attack, and they always seemed to happen in May. around Mother's Day, and she was usually in the hospital for about 3 weeks, and the doctor would say that she could go home if she had someone to stay with her when my grandfather was at work, because he wanted somebody to be there just in case something happened. And invariably she would call my mother and she would ask if I could come and spend the time with her, because it was about the time I got out of school. And my mother always said yes. And Grandma and I had a really good relationship, and I love spending any kind of time with her whatsoever. She used to tell me amazing stories and stuff like that. But my father got really upset because she was sick and she'd had another heart attack, and he was ranting and raving about her being overweight and that she needed to do something about that. And I was livid. My grandmother had been overweight my whole life. I didn't know her any other way, and she was the kindest, most loving person I knew. And she was my savior on many occasions during my tumultuous growing up. And I just stood up and I said, "You cannot talk about Grandma that way. I don't ever want to hear you say anything like that again. She is a kind and wonderful person." And I just stomped out of the room again. And he didn't come after me then either, because again, he knew he was wrong. So for me, being able to stand up against my father, who was one of the scariest people that I knew, about something that was in my belief system, really made me know that I was doing the right thing, and it made it possible for me to stand up to other people where other situations and other ideas might be involved. So we come down to number 5. It helps you be independent. First, if you don't stand up for yourself or your beliefs, then how can you expect others to? And second, the person who should always be able to, you should always be able to count on to stand up for you, no matter what, is you. And that's absolutely the truth. You sometimes have to stand up for yourself. I think that part of my parochial school upbringing also gave me a sense of social justice. And when I was going through school, I was unaware, but we were poor. I found out that I was poor when I was in college, because I qualified for a specific program that was only for people who were poor. So I always had the idea, because we, in the school, every year at Thanksgiving, we collected canned goods and took them to needy families. Anything that was non-perishable we took. And I remember one year when I was in high school, we got the name of each class got the name of a family. And we contributed a complete Thanksgiving dinner to them. We even had to cook the turkey for the class, for the family that my class got, because they had no functioning oven. And so we went over, and it was in the poorest part of town, and we delivered them their Thanksgiving dinner. And it impressed me that any time that you have things, it is your responsibility when you are able to give back, to have that kind of continuous giving back to those places that need it, and to pay it forward, not to the place that you necessarily got the help from, but to someone else who can use help at that time. And that was one thing that really stuck with me after going through high school, that it was my responsibility. And when we moved here to this area, the first year, not the first year, probably a couple, when I changed where I was working in the hospital, I found out about the Salvation Army tree. And so I asked the people at work, "Hey, can we get a family from Salvation Army, and then we can get whatever they need and take it over to the Salvation Army to be given to them?" And they said yes. all of my coworkers said yes. So I contacted Salvation Army, and they gave us a whole family. It was 5 kids and the parents. And so we all contributed. Each of the kids got an article of clothing. They got a toy, and there was any number of things. They gave us all their sizes of everything so we could do anything that we wanted in terms of that. And I was very, very thankful and grateful and headed that up. And when I moved on to the next unit that I was working, I started that as well. And by then my own daughter was 11. And she had saved up some money, and we had gotten a family, and I had chosen one little boy. I chose one of the older ones because most people want the younger kids so that they can get them toys and stuff like that. And my daughter took her own money, and she asked me to take her to the store, and she bought, at the time, a pair of Nikes, which were just coming into popularity with the kids. And I said, why are you doing this? You don't have to do this. And she said, Mom, I want a kid to have something nice, something that other kids will have, so that they can feel comfortable and confident when they're going to school. So yes, I want to buy this, and yes, I want to use my own money. And I was incredibly proud of her. She was always an amazing kid, even from the time she was really little, but this was another cherry on the cake. And it just made me feel that she had embodied some of the ideas and principles that I held for myself. And I am ever grateful for that, because I'm fortunate to have 2 daughters who are wonderful human beings, which really was my goal. So I want to say thank you, and I hope that you can take one of these items or all of them and use it in your life. Namaste.